Okay, we're going to be listening to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Part 1. And here's the picture that goes with it. You can kind of see there's a man on a horse, but he's missing a head, and he's holding it in his hands. Right now, we're not going to worry about the editor's note. This is a 3-part series. Okay, the editor's note says, this is the first in a 3-part series telling of the story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman. The tale was written by American author Washington Irving in the early 1800s. The story of suspicious schoolteacher Ichabod Crane takes place in 1790 in the Dutch settlement of Tarrytown, New York. Paragraph 1. Along the shore of the Hudson River in New York, there lies a small town called Tarrytown. Not far from this village is a little valley among the hills. It is one of the quietest places in the world. A small brook glides through it, murmuring just enough to lull one to sleep. The occasional noise of a bird is the only sound that ever interrupts the calm. When I was a young man, I went to shoot squirrels in this valley. I wandered into the woods at noon, when all nature is quiet. I was startled by the roar of my own gun. The sound broke through the stillness around me and echoed through the trees. If I should ever wish for a retreat from the world, I know of no better place than this valley. This is first person. Because of the calmness, this hidden valley is known as Sleepy Hollow. A dreamy quality seems to hang over the land and fill the air. Some say that a German doctor put a spell on the place many years ago. Others say that an old Native American chief held his powwows there before the Europeans came. Certainly, the place is still under the spell of some mysterious power. The people of Sleepy Hollow have all kinds of marvelous beliefs. They frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood is filled with strange tales and haunted spots. A ghost of a headless man on horseback. The main spirit that haunts the region is the ghost of the headless man on horseback. It is said to be the spirit of a German soldier whose head was knocked off by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. Ever since then, his ghost has been haunting the valley. It is often seen near the church where soldiers were buried. Some say the ghost rides forth each night to the scene of the battle looking for his head. He rushes back to the church before morning. This legend has inspired many wild stories in that region of shadows. The specter is known as the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Ichabod Crane came to Sleepy Hollow. Some 30 years ago, a man named Ichabod Crane came to Sleepy Hollow. He was a teacher, a tall, skinny man with long arms and legs. His head was small with huge ears and a long nose. This head looked like a weather vane placed on the top of his neck to tell which way the wind blew. Ichabod Crane was so thin that he almost looked like a scarecrow. His schoolhouse was a long building with one large room. It stood in a rather lonely but pleasant place, just at the foot of a woody hill. A brook ran nearby. From there the low murmur of his students' voices might be heard on a summer day, interrupted now and then by the voice of the teacher. When school was over, Ichabod Crane was the friend to the larger boys. On holiday afternoons he would walk some of the smaller ones home. It helped him to be on good terms with his students. It was the custom in those parts for the teacher to stay at the student's house. Ichabod Crane lived with a different family each week, making his way through the neighborhood. He kept everything he owned tied up in a cotton handkerchief. So that he wouldn't be a burden to his host, Ichabod Crane found ways to make himself useful. He helped the farmers make hay and cut wood for the winter fire. He helped the mothers by looking after their children. He would sometimes sit with a child on one knee, rocking a cradle with his foot. In addition to his other jobs, Ichabod Crane was the singing master of the neighborhood. He earned some extra money by teaching the young folks how to sing the Bible Psalms. It was a matter of pride to him on Sundays to stand in church with a band of chosen singers. His voice resounded far above all the rest. In this way, Ichabod Crane got on well enough and seemed to have a wonderfully easy life. No tale was too unpleasant or monstrous for him to enjoy. The teacher is generally a man of some importance around the women of the rural neighborhood. They consider him a kind of gentleman, with better taste than the rough country men. Our Ichabod Crane was made especially happy by the smiles of all the country damsels. On Sunday he would gather grapes for them from the wild vines. Sometimes they would walk together along the banks of the mill pond. The country bumpkins would hang back, envying his style and grace. Because he had no permanent home, Ichabod Crane was like a traveling newspaper. He carried the local gossip from house to house. People were always happy to see him. The women considered him a man of great knowledge because he had read several books all the way through. One of the books was Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, a book filled with frightening stories. Ichabod Crane loved these stories. No tale was too unpleasant or monstrous for him to enjoy. After school, he would often lie down on the clover beside the schoolhouse. He would study old Mather's dreadful tales until it was too dark to read. As he made his way home, every sound of nature excited his imagination. He would listen to the cry of the tree toad and the hooting of the screech owl to keep himself from getting frightened. He would sing songs to himself. The good people of Sleepy Hollow often heard his voice floating through the hills and along the dark roads. Another of his fearful pleasures was to pass long winter evenings with the older wives. Ichabod Crane would sit with them around the fire. He would listen to their marvelous tales of ghosts and goblins and the headless horseman. He would delight them with his own stories of witchcraft, phantoms of his own mind. If there was pleasure in all of this, it came at the cost of the terrors on his walk home. What fearful shapes and shadows appeared on his path! How often was he shocked by some shrub covered with snow, which appeared like a ghost! How often did he shrink at the sound of his own steps! And how often was he startled by some howling among the trees, thinking it was the headless horseman! But all of these were simply terrors of the night, phantoms in his own mind. Daylight always put them to an end, and he would have a pleasant life in his path had not been crossed by a being. It got cut off, so I had to write it. A being that caused more confusion to man than all the ghosts put together. This being was a woman. Okay, the story ends there, to be continued. Dun, dun, dun. Stay tuned for the next one.